Well, I want to welcome everybody here, and I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Salem City Budget Committee for November 16th, 2000. Shall the recorder please call the roll call?
Mayor Peterson?
Here.
Member Bennett? Absent. Member Anderson?
Present.
Member Nanke?
Here.
Member McCoy?
Here.
Member Dickey? Absent. Member Benjamin?
Here.
Member Benars?
Here.
Member Lewis?
Here.
Member Nordyke? Absent. Member Kylowite?
Here.
Member Bailey?
Here.
Member Moore Green?
Here.
Member Wildfang? Absent. Member Gonzalez? Absent. Member Hazlitt?
Here.
Member Berkman?
Here.
Member Milton? Absent.
So with that, if we could stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah, Vanessa.
Well, as our chair could not make it this evening, it befell on me as vice chair to be sitting tonight in the head seat, and this is a real pleasure to myself. This is the first time in 4 years that I've been able to sit in this chair, and anyway, maybe some day in the future.
All right. There you go.
Let's see. We have the minutes from the May 11th, 2016 Urban Renewal, City of Salem and Urban Renewal Agency budget meeting. Do I have a motion to approve? Yes, Anderson. I'm not sure the title here.
Yeah, well,
Member Anderson.
thank you, Vice Chair Bednars, if we're talking about titles. On behalf of Mayor Peterson, I would like to make a change to the minutes before I move them, and I'm on page 3 of the minutes. Under the substitute motion right in the middle, it said it was motion by Member Anderson, spelled Andersen,
Yes.
seconded by Member Peterson, spelled Petersen.
Oh, well.
And I'm very sensitive about that, and I'm sure the mayor is too. So that's Peterson, not Petersen.
Well, okay, so are you making the
With
motion?
that correction, I move that the minutes be approved.
Okay. We have a second, and I heard it first from Member Nanke. So with that, what do we do here?
You call for all those in favor.
Call for those in favor of the motion. Say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. At this point, it's my understanding that the review of the handout material and presentations noted under Agenda 5 will be combined this evening. So at this time, I would like to ask Budget Officer Jacobs to come to the podium.
Thank you, Chair Benars. And before I get started with my presentations, I would first like to acknowledge that this is the last meeting of this committee to be attended by members Benars and Peterson. And with that acknowledgement, please allow me to express my appreciation for your service in this capacity and for the benefit derived by this organization and our community. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So I have quite a bit of ground to cover with you this evening, and
Okay.
my staff has reminded me to speak slowly. So feel free at any time to ask me to slow down, but I do have a lot of ground to cover. The handout materials this evening align with the presentations listed under Agenda Item 5, so I will be combining the explanation, as Chair Benars noted earlier. I'll be combining handouts and presentations. First, I would like to take just a few minutes to orient your review of the variance analysis and then discuss year-end results in summary. As you may have noted, the 4-page analysis is a graphic display with relatively minimal text. Page 1, which is displayed on the screen, looks at the general fund in total. The first column at the vertical center of the page is the actual to budget result. A positive percentage for revenue means year-end results exceeded budget. The negative percentages for expenditures are indicative of actual experience being less than what was budgeted. In the next column, year-over-year results, it can be read in the same way. A positive percent for either resources or expenditures indicates fiscal year 2016 results exceeded the prior year. The far right column displays the variance between actual experience and what I thought would happen by the end of the fiscal year. This prediction was made in January of 2016 when we began compiling the fiscal year 2017 budget, and as part of that work, I established a working capital estimate for the fund. In this display, a positive percentage and upward pointing arrow for revenue means actual experience exceeded my estimates. The downward pointing arrows for expenditures mean actual experience was less than what I anticipated. The next 2 pages, and I'll just drill down here with you. The next 2 pages of this document drill down with displays for various general fund revenue categories and department level expenditures. The display is slightly different, however, the column headings should be helpful in navigating the data. The final page is a narrative-heavy summary and an explanation of how we got to where we are with working capital. The change in working capital is partly due to an element in the annual budget process called reappropriations, or carryovers. The change is also due to unanticipated revenues, almost $500,000 by year end. A third significant component of the change is unanticipated savings. There are a number of reasons for the unanticipated savings, with employee attrition and challenges in recruiting new employees being just 2 causes. So with that explanation of how to use the variance analysis document, I have 4 slides that summarize year-end results. And I'm going to switch to those right now. And struggle getting it onto the slide presentation. There we go. So that first slide there's a highlighted area with bold text at the bottom of the slide. This is the net revenue budget to actual comparison for the fund. The year-end result was $1.39 million, or 1.3% more than budget. This next slide is a comparison of actual to actual, and I'll switch to that. Or year-over-year experience. Again, the highlighted area at the bottom, the bold print, demonstrates that net revenues in fiscal year 2016 were $4.9 million, or 4.7% greater than the prior year. The next 2 slides demonstrate year-end results for expenditures. In the first of these slides, the comparison is again budget to actual. That's what you're seeing now. The year-end result for net expenditures is $10.5 million, or 9% less than budget. To provide a little context for that variance, about $2.4 million of the total difference was related to PERS. $2.4 million was unspent contingency, and over $2.2 million was reappropriated into fiscal year 2017 budget. The last slide is a comparison of actual to actual experience. The highlighted area at the bottom demonstrates that net expenditures in fiscal year 2016 exceeded the prior year by $5.66 million, or 5.6%. So the final takeaway from these 4 slides is the actual to actual result in both net revenues and net expenditures. Net revenues increased by 4.7% year over year, while net expenditures increased by 5.6%. There are many reasons, multiple variables that influence these year-over-year changes. From a larger view, revenues increasing at a lower rate than expenditures is something that we pay attention to. So I would be happy to respond to any questions regarding the variance analysis.
Member Nenke?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't writing fast enough. Back 1 slide, the component to that 10.48 million.
Oh, sure.
There was 2.4 PERS.
I listed part of them, Counselor.
Right.
I didn't list all of them. But 2.4 million of the difference was related to PERS. 2.4 was unspent contingency. And over 2.2 million was reappropriated into the fiscal year 2017 budget.
Reappropriated?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Reappropriated, so carryover.
No other questions?
So, any other questions?
Member Anderson? With the
Thank you, Kelly. This is very important and very helpful, and I'm thinking on the snapshot results on the first slide you showed us, that, you know, when you're 0.6%, 0.2%, 0.4%, that's a very good result, I think, for your, what you're talking about. When you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that you forecasted within 2 to 0.6%. So
We felt pretty comfortable with
kudos to
revenue-
you and your
with re-
staff for doing that,
Thank you.
is how I read that.
Thank you.
Then I have a question on the next page under General Fund Resources. I don't know if you can
Yeah,
get
I'll
it
try to
up there.
For the variance analysis,
Yeah, yeah.
I will get back there. So, excuse me just a moment.
No, you're looking into these.
Yeah, that's, yeah, that's it.
Yep.
I'm looking at the 148, almost 149% increase in planning-related fees. I would say that in general is a good thing too, meaning we had more planning and more development than you had anticipated.
That is correct. The 148.9% is over budget. So in
Yeah.
other words, it was significantly over budget as compared to what we had anticipated.
Yeah, and that's good.
That's a good thing.
And so in planning for the next year, did you readjust your figures of what you believe the
Yes, we
revenue
did.
is going to be based on your,
Well, we had the advantage
150%?
of activity during the first half of the fiscal year that helped inform the estimate that we made for the 2017 budget.
okay? Let's see here. Then on the results summary, the final page of that slide, second paragraph, you indicate, and I can understand how these short-term URA loans that we're always approving, and it goes back and forth, but it says the practice of borrowing from the general fund for these short-term loans ceases with this budget.
With the fiscal year
Yeah, and
2017
why
budget.
is that? And then how are we gonna, where do we get the money from if we need to borrow for that?
That's great. Well, we'll
that time?
borrow it from an actual lending establishment.
Okay, and why were we doing that then?
Why are we doing that rather than
Yeah.
putting it into the general fund?
Yeah.
There is, and I will tell you, there will be a cost associated with borrowing it.
Yeah,
We previously borrowed it from,
Ourselves at no,
well, before we started borrowing from the general fund, we would borrow from a bank.
okay,
But we decided to do the borrowings internal. But the problem with this is that it overstates the general fund revenue and expenditure budget.
Sure.
And we're continually having to either put it in or pull it out to be able to give you comparisons.
Yeah.
And so it was at my request that if we could make it, if it was possible to borrow externally, that we would borrow externally.
all right. So that will be a slight increase in expense.
That could be an increase in expense to the Urban Renewal Agency, that is correct.
Okay, and it won't really be that much because they're only short-term loans.
Well, we're exploring exactly what it might be.
Okay.
And there are some other options potentially that we might have that we're consulting with our bond counsel in regard to borrowing. So
And in the-
we'll be coming back to you with a plan.
I thought that you would. And in the past, when we've done that internally, borrowed from ourselves, there was no interest involved at all, was there?
Oh, yes, no.
Okay.
But because it was just a one-day borrowing, it was
Yeah.
very small interest.
Which could be the same with, it'll be a small amount of interest, even though I presume that if you go to a lending institution, they're going to be at a little
There's a
higher
different
rate.
layering of cost and fees
Sure,
when you go to
sure.
a lending
Okay.
institution.
Let's see. No, the other question I had was the question that Member Nanki asked, and you answered it.
Great.
Thank you.
So Member Peterson.
I do have a question also for Ms. Jacobs. So I remember last year that we borrowed money from one of the city utility funds, I think.
That is
The
correct.
wastewater fund,
That's
or
right.
maybe, was that right?
Yes.
For the parking meters.
That is correct.
So where does that show up in terms of an expenditure and a revenue?
Sure. It does actually show up in this display as a revenue. It is in, let me make sure that I orient myself here, just one moment. I think it's in all other sources, I believe, in that category of all other sources.
Uh-huh.
But it is, I will tell you, it is in the general fund as a revenue. It is also, now, last year, I believe we actually carried over some of the borrowing in working capital, and we also then borrowed additionally last year. So you'll see that the loan proceeds will be in working capital and in actual other revenues. And then the expenditure was incurred in non-departmental, in the general fund. That project was expensed out of non-departmental general fund.
Okay.
So on the page of expenditures, for instance, that has the
Which
department
page are you
expenditures,
talking about?
That would be page 3 of the
Page
variance
what?
analysis.
Got it.
The amount that was spent there for, in non-departmental, and it's that's a combined budget amount for support services and non-departmental, but part of that is the expense of the parking meter project. Part of that 16.5 million is the parking meter project.
I don't think I have the right. Here we are. Thank you. Okay, I've got it.
Yep.
Okay.
So both the proceeds and the expense is in the general fund.
Thank you.
And in the current year, we have debt service. So we actually paid debt service on the loan in 2015-16, and we'll pay again in fiscal year 2017 until the loan is paid.
Okay, thank you.
So, Member Bailey.
This isn't really a question, but just a thank you for these, particularly the first 4 pages. These, it takes a lot of work to boil this stuff down and make it clear and simple and in a consistent format. And I know it's complex material, but I appreciate it very much. It helps give a window into the topic, and then we can go from there. So thanks
You're
a
very
lot to
welcome.
you and staff.
You're welcome.
So we move on to the budget status update,
Let's do that.
if there are no more questions. I don't see any.
So, item 4B is a staff report discussing the current status of a dozen expenditures in the fiscal year 2017 budget, including new positions, expanded programs, and special initiatives. And if you've all had a chance to read that report, I'm not going to go over it in any detail, and I'm just curious if there are any questions about it.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. Let's use the fire department for an example. Number one, you know, the budget committee, we said no as a budget committee, but it came to the council, and the council said yes as the council.
That is correct.
So of the $1.7 million, how much is actually going to be spent or was spent for the fiscal year?
Well, it's being spent as we
Okay,
speak.
it's going to go down.
Oh, yes, it will be
okay,
spent.
Okay.
I would
all of it.
anticipate, and I can ask.
And there's the chief. Yeah,
Mike Niblock, Fire Chief, all of it.
Okay.
We are going to be very, very tight on our budget this year. In the memo, you saw that we had some issues with recruiting people.
Yeah.
And so we had to go out and do a lateral hire, kind of thinking on our feet there real quickly. We've been able to maintain enough employees that we're going to be able to start that engine probably 1st of January or second week of January. So this entire time from July 1st until January, we've been operating basically on overtime.
sure.
So we've had some salary savings. We had a couple empty deputy chief positions that we used some of that money. So we're trying to keep this resource and service as much as possible.
Okay.
But we are going to expend every penny of that 1.7.
And that was my question, because I could see in the details that you hadn't been able to hire everybody as soon as you wanted, but
Right.
All those expenses are going to, that extra 1.7 is eaten up by the overtime, by the lateral hires, which I presume are at maybe at a higher rate than a higher
It's
higher
very
at the bottom.
Very
of them.
competitive now in the field for firefighters. So we had to step up our what we would bring them in at. We're bringing them in at a higher step than some of the other departments, and so we're recruiting people away from other organizations, so that's always very challenging. And we were able to get 15 candidates, and so we were able to fill some of our other vacancies. We're going to be fully staffed with all of our FTEs second week of January, which is not the norm for us. Normally, we're 3 or 4 or 5 people down.
Terrific.
And we're already planning for next spring's hiring for vacancies and retirements and those types of things. So we're already got lists going for next spring. So
Then, as long as you're up here, Chief, I see that the response time has gone from 72.6 to 74 point something. What was the goal? Was it an 85%? Was that the goal you had set for yourself?
The council standard is 5.5-minute response time, 85% of the time.
Okay. And so we're moving in that direction, and I presume as the new hires, everybody gets really integrated into the force, that that the percentage is going to continue to go up to some extent.
Well, that's a loaded question. So we're also seeing an increase of about 2,000 calls for service each year.
Okay.
And so I would describe it as treading water is what we're doing right now. We have seen some gains in Station 8's district of about 10%. We've only had 3 months of data, so that's a very small sample. So, but I think that's what I told council. We'd see between 10 and 12% in that district, and we're seeing 10% gains. And citywide, we're seeing about 1% or 1.5% higher than we were at this time during this period last year. So we are seeing some improvements, but again, we're going to run 22,000 calls this year, and we ran 20,000 last year. So
Sure.
we're in this teeter-totter balancing act, and I would say that when the new recruits come on, we have seasoned firefighters running that truck right now, so I wouldn't expect a huge jump in response times because we have those people. They'll just be working for straight wages instead of overtime.
Okay. Thank you very much,
You bet.
Chief. I see that Chief Moore is here. I have the same question about the efforts to hire the two new police officers of the $271,000. Is that all going to be expended too?
Jerry Moore, Chief of Police. We certainly hope that's the case. Our goal is to be fully staffed. We were 12 down, I think, at the end of September. We hired 6. We do have additional attrition, but our goal is to be fully staffed by the end of the fiscal year.
Great, thank you.
Member Peterson.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Chief Neblock regarding the fire department. And this is really more of a question for your overview observation, as you did an analysis last spring, when the budget committee was carefully looking at your budget and looking at response times. Then later, the city council decision was to allocate $1.7 million to the fire department for the chief's analysis of the need. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that, because I know at the time we talked about whether you should place, one of the considerations you had was placing another engine and staff in an existing fire station, reopening 8, doing something with a mobile station. Can you talk about the process you sort of went through to make the decision that the right thing to do was to fully reopen Station 8?
So yes, we looked at the calls that were not being answered in that specific district, and we compared it to Station 11, for example. There were more calls in Station 8's district, so we try to do the greatest good for the greatest number when we do that analysis. And we also looked at opportunities we had talked about the last budget process, would we do a different model? Would we do a squad? Would we do extra ambulances? And when we looked at that, we get the most value out of the fire truck, because it can respond to all the calls. It goes to medicals, fires, and traps, and all those types of calls as well. One thing that we're working on right now is we're doing an analysis with Marion County Fire District 1, a feasibility study to try to look at how we could work together better between two agencies, specifically on the Lancaster border. We have a lot of integration out there, and there's a dense population out there, and there's probably a better way for us to use our resources out there. That study's ongoing right now. I expect sometime after January, maybe February or March, that we'll have some things to bring back to talk about on possible options for us to consider with that agency. But right now, when we looked at our deployment model, the smartest thing to do was to add that fire truck back. And I would tell you, if I got more resources, I'd probably add another engine back in the system before I started looking at squads or other types of resources. And we are looking to the future. There may be some other funding mechanisms that we may come across in 2018 that may help us put some of those types of resources in the system. So then we would take a look at the call volume in the areas where maybe they're underserved a little bit or the response times are too long, and put a two-person vehicle in an area like that, so it would have quicker response to stop the clock for heart attacks and those types of things. They wouldn't be able to fight fire, but there'd be other resources coming. So we're looking at all those types of things and trying to analyze and trying to provide the best service we can with the dollars that are allotted to us.
Was there also an analysis of the ambulance providers' response times and the use of that, and maybe possibly expanding or adding to the number of ambulances?
Yes, we did look at that. One of the things that we are doing, which is going to happen here probably in the next 2 weeks, is we're going to add 4 more posting locations. Right now at peak period, which is a couple hours during the middle of the day when when a lot of the call volumes are higher, we have 10 ambulances in the system. And they have 6 posts. So that means some posts have 2 ambulances in them. Well, that's not a very efficient use of having 2 rigs parked next to each other. So we've put 4 more posts out into the community. They're spread out northeast, some are south, some are west. That'll spread those ambulances out a little further, give us a better response time. Something else that's happening within the last month or so is they're going through the same kind of thing with recruitment issues and getting people, and they're fully staffed now. They've got a couple extra employees, and they are actually have agreed to put a couple ambulances in the system when they have the staff to do it, and so they have sometimes 12 ambulances in. Now, that's not a contractual thing. It's a thing that they're doing to help the community, so we certainly appreciate that, and that helps us keep our response times down. But we continually, quarter by quarter, we analyze their ability to respond to meet the standards that are set for them, and they're meeting those at a very high rate, 98, 99%. So we're very pleased with their performance and their ability to be a good community partner and help us when they have extra resources that they don't need to put in service, but they do anyway.
Great. Well, that's a good report.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Member Bailey?
Similarly on fire, and maybe it's for the members of the Budget Committee who are also on the City Council. One of my concerns, and I think it was shared by others on the Budget Committee last spring when we were going through the item to add the $1.7 million to the budget for fire, was that it was, in my mind, in some respects, a one-time addition, or it was an addition that came up in the context of the Budget Committee, and it was not part of a strategic plan or a long-term plan to make that increase, which we all know is needed, sustainable. So I'm wondering what is the plan going forward? Are we going to, once again, in the budget process, look at adding an additional amount? Have we raised the floor for the fire department budget now? And if so, how are we going to sustain that additional amount? Because that was the question going into it, as I recall. So where are we on that? And I don't know who answers that.
Well, I think there are several pieces to that question. In response,
No doubt.
in response to the amount that was approved by City Council
Right.
for reopening the fire station, that is built into the budget going forward. Whether it stays in the budget, it's early for me to make that conclusion. One reason is because starting tonight, the Budget Committee, which you'll be hearing more about later on the agenda, will have an opportunity to provide some policy discussion regarding choices and priorities and decisions going forward. And then certainly the other reason why it's difficult for me to give an affirmative answer tonight is we're just beginning the budget process. Budget Officer Jacobson in a moment will be going over the financial projections with you. So to answer your question specifically, the money to continue the station is assumed in the fiscal year 17-18 budget. Is there a plan for the fire department? The chief mentioned one small piece that he's looking at with a neighboring jurisdiction as part of a larger city plan. Again, you'll be hearing more about that here in a few minutes from Echo Northwest. And certainly fire is a critical, I think, a critical part of that discussion of the need to have a plan that's sustainable going forward, that provides a level of service that council determines is affordable and necessary.
Okay. I had a quick question, and it had to do with the 1.3 million that we did not appropriate through the adoption of the budget. Is that still on the line? If you still had some more money, is it 8, I think it is, that would be opened?
Can you repeat that question?
Well, when we talked about this, it was about 3 million, 1.7 to open up the station that's east of Salem, and another 1.3 to open up the second.
Station 11.
Station
Yes.
11, thank
Yeah.
you.
That's still closed right
Still
now.
closed, still don't see any chance of that opening then?
If we had the funding,
That's it,
I would be
1.3.
happy to open that station, yeah.
Okay. Any further questions? Member Moore Green.
Thank you. My memory might be fading. However, wasn't there a grant of some sort that you were also waiting on while we were in budget discussions last spring?
Yes, and we were informed a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, that we were not successful in getting that grant. It was the SAFER grant, and we had proposed 40-hour staffing, and that level of staffing is pretty low on the priority list for the granting agency. So that's certainly something that we continue to look at grants. We got the SCBA grant last year for $651,000. We just rolled all those SCBAs into service on the 14th. So, brand new SCBAs, purchased brand new radios. So we're keeping up with our equipment needs, but we do consider those grants every year.
Member Anderson.
Thank you, Chief. Wasn't the grant that Member Moore Green was talking about, wasn't it kind of a catch-22 situation that if we allocated the budget money, the odds would be less that we would get the grant because budget money was allocated for it?
I think from the perspective that we still have a closed fire station, I don't know that that really weighed into their decision. I think it was more the fact that people that were staffing 4 people on an engine company had top priority. People who were hiring firefighters who had been laid off were the second priority. 24-hour staffing is the third priority, and anything other than that is the bottom priority. So there was hundreds of millions of dollars of requests and not that much money to go around. So there was a lot of people who were denied. They had 1,300 departments request funding. Some of these departments are requesting several $1 million for funding. Our request was a little smaller than that. But so we would have been higher in priority if we would have requested 24-hour staffing. But I don't think putting Station 8 back in service would have an impact on, because we still have a closed fire station. We can still have that argument.
Thanks.
So on to, I guess,
Presentation 5.
presentation.
That's exactly right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So before I begin this presentation, I need to make a small disclaimer. And this discussion of assumptions, this discussion of assumptions to be employed in the 5-year forecast is very definitely subject to change over the next 2 months as we develop the forecast schedules and the documents. So we're just talking about some very preliminary assumptions here. Much of what we assume about the fiscal future, what we forecast, is informed by the recent past and by our current experience. This presentation provides a very brief overview of current experience in the general fund, as well as some preliminary planning for the upcoming 5-year forecast. And true to my promise to all of you when I emailed the presentation and notes on Monday evening, I plan to highlight just 1 or 2 key points or takeaways for each slide. This pie chart displays the current fiscal year revenue budget. The comparison to prior year actual experience is provided in the chart legend. A key point from this display, and I have more detail later in the presentation, is the total fiscal year 2017 revenue budget the budget estimate, in other words, or what we put into the budget, is very achievable. There are revenue categories where I anticipate budget amounts to be exceeded, and categories where actual experience may be less than what was budgeted. With property tax information now available, we anticipate actual experience will exceed the budget for current year receipts. Because a larger share of current tax owed has been paid when it's due over the past few years, we are also reevaluating and reforecasting revenues derived from the payment of prior year taxes. The second key point related to property tax is the impact of gains in valuation is prompting an increase in our estimate for property tax growth in the upcoming forecast. That's good news.
So just to be clear, if I may, so you're looking at a 4.04% increase
Year over year.
year over year in the property tax portion of the revenue.
That's right, in the current year
Okay.
property tax portion of revenue.
Okay.
So just to clarify, in all, our property tax receipts, and you'll notice this in the budget volume, are broken down by current year receipts, first year prior, second year prior, and all other prior years. So we receive each year taxes that are owed in previous years. So what I'm saying, the 4% increase would be on current receipts.
Got you.
So there's quite a bit going on, and I need to advance my slides. There's quite a bit going on with the revenue type of franchise fees. We are seeing the impact of some rate increases and decreases and potentially changes in demand and usage. As a result, current year receipts are anticipated to be flat or approximately equal to fiscal year 2016 in this category as a whole. During the forecast period, I am assuming moderate and variable changes based on the franchise type and consistent with current trending. Internal, yes.
So back to the other slide, so on electric ratio, 2.5/flat.
Those are rate increases that have been requested,
So it's 2.5% for BGA, flat for Salem.
as far as we know, yes, at this time.
Got it.
Internal charges represent the third highest source of revenue for the general fund. As most citywide support services are housed in the general fund, the process of internal charging from one fund to another is complicated, carefully managed, and it's integral to the fiscal health of the fund. And I won't go into an explanation of the indirect cost allocation plan tonight. We'll talk about that at another meeting. Year-over-year increases in alcohol-related state-shared revenues is good news. The likelihood that the increased receipts will be less than the budget is not good news, but there's a likelihood that that will happen. With currently available information, the year-end estimate is $3.94 million as compared to a budget of $4.04 million. That is not, however, the question I am most frequently asked regarding state-shared revenues. In response to that FAQ, information from the State of Oregon DOR indicates that marijuana shared revenue disbursements may not occur until earlier mid-fiscal year 2018. So that would be approximately January. And January of 2018. And one final assumption that we have in regard to shared revenues is the concern that continued access to these funds may be vulnerable to the state's budget needs.
Member, yes, Lewis.
Yeah, let's go back to marijuana for a minute.
Okay.
Because it's possible that you'll see a decrease in alcohol revenues because people are choosing the other option. I don't know that for
We're doing all kinds of
sure.
speculating in that regard.
The state has been collecting 25% of all sales this year, and you're saying they're not distributing any of that monies until sometime 2 years from now.
That is the last information that we have from the Department of Revenue, yes.
We should maybe get the state some calculators so they can do their figuring quicker. My question is, what about the 3% tax that goes into effect, I think it's January 1st?
Yes, and I believe we'll be working, that's our own sales tax, our local sales tax for marijuana, recreational marijuana, and I believe we'll be working with the state in regard to the collection of that tax.
So
The state, that's part of the delay, I think, Member Lewis, is that the state is working through its processes for collection and distributing the shares of revenue. There are some process things that they need to work through, and I think that we will be taking advantage of that work as we look to collect our 3% sales tax.
Okay, last question.
Got to write the program for
Does the city track the income now, currently?
For the state?
No. Well, for the state or
locally,
for us?
No, we have not been tracking, we have no mechanism to track the revenue locally.
So we're going to get a check maybe from the state of Oregon and take it or leave it?
Member Lewis, I can guarantee that we will be on top of this issue. And we'll make sure that as much as we can, we'll make sure that this is done as well and accurately, and we're auditing these results.
As long as we're sitting at this question, one of the questions that I had, and I don't know if you'll have the answer to, any anticipated idea how much that revenue is going to be from the recreational marijuana?
We had a very small estimate in the 2017 budget that we need, and I think we used $100,000 for the ballot measure, I believe, and I would anticipate that it would be more than that. But I can't tell you how much at this time. We don't have
This is the same discussion we had last year.
Yeah, we just don't have sufficient data yet. But as soon as we do, we'll share it with you.
Any other questions? Do you have more presentation in the general
I
fund?
do. I have a little more to go.
Okay.
I'll be quick. So the revenue category of fees for service and other fees encompasses all fee revenue generated in the general fund. The key point here is for forecasting purposes, I will be using variable rates of inflation due to the variety of revenue types in this category. There are 21. At this point, it is anticipated that planning-related fees will reflect the highest rate of increase in the category due to demand and to ensure an ongoing level of cost recovery for the services. The intergovernmental revenue category includes grants and payments from other agencies. Due to grant awards, this revenue category can be rather variable. There is a base level of grant receipts, about $500,000, that I plan to use in the forecast. It is important to note that grants have frequently provided funding for necessary public safety equipment that would otherwise need to be funded with other general fund resources. Oops. With improved parking enforcement activities and new fine rates established last year, I plan to forecast a consistent level of parking fine revenue through the forecast period. But because of variables related to court fines, including the unknown potential of changes to laws and law enforcement activities, I am currently assuming a small growth factor in the forecast for this revenue type. In the revenue category of rents and all other sources, fiscal year 2017 will represent an almost full year of use for the new parking meters and kiosks. We will also experience use of this new technology during a regular legislative year, which impacts usage. Any and all data gathered through the next several months will influence how we estimate parking meter revenue into the future. We've had a dearth of data trying to make these estimates a year or two ago, so we'll have the luxury of more data in making our future estimates. This slide provides a related data set to the first chart on revenue. It's the other side of the budget equation, with the chart representing the fiscal year 2017 expenditure budget and the legend including a comparison of prior year activity. So the reason that you're just getting these you're seeing these data-heavy slides is because all of this information informs how we forecast for the future year, how our revenues and expenditures end the fiscal year relative to budget, relative to the prior year. This is data that we use for forecasting purposes. Drilling down to expenditure categories, there are two key points to emphasize regarding general fund personal services and future forecasting. The first is our intent to forecast multiple scenarios instead of just one for market adjustments or COLAs outside of an actual labor contract. We've not done this before, and I think it will be more informative and perhaps more relevant to future contract negotiations. The second point is related to PERS. We have the actual charge rates for fiscal year 2017 and fiscal year 2018. Over the next week or so, we will be finalizing PERS rate assumptions for the remainder of the forecast period. And to conclude this presentation, the two takeaways from this final slide are challenges and opportunities. An ongoing challenge in the general fund is balancing increased personal services costs with other needs like fleet and equipment replacement and facility and system upgrades that are funded in the expense categories of materials and services and capital outlay. The current opportunity in the fiscal year 2017 budget includes the initiatives to update facility condition assessments, improve forecasting for fleet needs, evaluate position classification and compensation, and introduce citywide strategic planning to inform decisions and help to balance priorities and general fund forecasts going forward.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. I'd like to back up to the slide that has the PERS rates. And first of all, OPSRP, that's an acronym I'm not sure about.
It's Oregon Public, David, could you help me with that acronym? I'm not sure. It's OPSRP, yeah. Yeah, it's our Tier 3.
Okay, that's what I thought it
Yeah.
was.
I just can't remember all the words that make up
All right,
that
right.
onerous acronym.
Right. No, I like OSPERS.
We call it
What do you call it?
OPSRP.
Yeah. It looks, there's no vowels there, so
Sorry,
it
it
looks
comes
pretty
up every
fun
once
to
in a while.
pronounce.
So David Lacey from Finance, yeah, the actual words, Oregon Public Service Retirement Plan.
Okay,
So it comes,
that's what I thought it was.
just to explain to you real quick, it's tier, we kind of call
Yeah,
it Tier 3.
I
but there's
understand
two
that.
portions, police and fire and general services.
Got
So
it,
you'll see
got
those
it.
rates separately.
So my question is, I'm looking at the PERS, and, there's only a difference, it's going to actually be 21.07%, and, it was 0.6% that was, you gained, it used to be 21.70. So my question is, that's not very much percentage-wise, but how much is that in actual dollars?
We will be coming back to you with that information when we provide you with the
Perfect.
general fund forecast.
And it's the same questions on Tier 1 and the...
That's correct.
Yeah, because some of those are bigger savings. I mean...
That's right.
It was anticipated...
That was a little piece of good news, actually.
Yeah, but I don't know if that 3% really allocates to a lot of money or not much money, and I would guess maybe the Tier 1 figures might end up being more money because it's more expensive to take care of those people, and you've got a lot of those people who might be retiring coming up soon.
Well, there's that too, but I think, and what we're comparing here in the notes that Counselor or Member Anderson is referring to, is I presented the PERS rates that we just received with what we had previously in the forecast for fiscal year 2018. And so we're going to see some small, it really will be not a huge savings resulting from the Tier 1, 2 rate, but we will see more savings resulting from OPSRP, just simply because of the percentage difference there.
Thanks.
Any further questions before we move on to the forecast? Seeing none.
I believe that was the forecast.
That's everything? It's the forecast, the strategic planning?
No.
I'll be back with you in January with the actual forecast.
We're moving on to the strategic planning initiative.
Okay.
Budget Committee may recall earlier this year when you were working on this year's budget, you discussed the need for an overarching plan to guide future decision-making. And the Budget Committee recommended and Council adopted a budget that included funding to do that initiative. Thank you. And tonight, you will be receiving a status report from Echo Northwest, the consultants that were selected after a national search for someone to assist us with that strategic planning effort. Despite a national search, we were fortunate to have some very, very talented, experienced, and qualified people just up the road in Portland. So they're nearby. When we finish this work, and Echo will go into more detail here in a moment, we'll have a citywide strategic plan that will, through council, articulate, set the mission, values, and goals for the organization, an annual work plan or policy agenda for council that will then help guide the work plans for the departments to achieve the policy agenda for council, and measures to gauge and report on progress. This work is being started with a situation assessment, a data gathering, and ECHO will be sharing some of those preliminary findings with you tonight. And from that work, from their evaluation, we'll have really a map of what we're doing now that will, I think, help council and the budget committee help identify some core policy priorities and help guide future goals and decision-making in a way that is planned and carries over from year to year. This is not going to be easy work. ECHO is helping us a great deal, but much of the heavy lifting will be by council and by the organization. ECHO is reviewing some of our current efforts, our current plans and initiatives to help us identify where we do have gaps or opportunities, and they're also gathering community input. They are going to be sharing, again, some of those preliminary findings from those efforts and talking about some next steps. For council, in January, you will be meeting and setting the mission, vision, values, and goals, really developing the strategic plan, and the timeline is for that strategic plan to be ready for council consideration in June. Again, thank you very much to the Budget Committee for recommending funding for this effort. I can speak for the organization that staff is very pleased that this effort is underway and is participating. We have several department directors that are participating on a steering committee. We have input from throughout the organization, and we're very enthusiastic about participating and helping implement what council decides as far as a strategic direction and strategic plan going forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce the consultants. Mr.
We have a question from Member Lewis.
Real quick, Mr. Powers, I thought the city had just done a survey, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm curious, this calls for a statistically valid survey. I don't think the one that was just done shortly was challenged as far as that goes. So how will the two surveys connect, or are they going to?
Well, I believe that survey you're referring to was for the police facility specifically.
Well, it also had what I would call general questions.
I think that data, if it hasn't been provided to ECHO Northwest, will and certainly can help shape the survey that will be part of this effort. And I think ECHO can speak to what that survey will look like and what it's intended to accomplish, that I think will go beyond the purpose of the survey that you're referring to. Terry Moore is with ECHO Northwest and is the lead person on this effort, and Terry can introduce the rest of the ECHO Northwest team. Thank you, Terry.
Good. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for having us here tonight. My name is Terry Moore. I'm with ECHO Northwest. I've been there about 40 years. I'm one of the founders. With me tonight are project manager Alexander Reese and Mike Gleason. Mike is a former city manager that I've worked with for many years and is helping us on this project. Not here today are BSD, a firm that specializes in public engagement and is working on a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking to you about briefly, and DHM, a firm out of Portland that's doing the survey work for us. My assignment tonight is to try to explain this in about 15 or 20 minutes. If that's okay with you, I'll try to stick to that schedule. I've been told, and it's rather obvious, I've been able to bore tougher audiences than this, and that if I don't get my terms right, I will lose people. So I want to start with just some simple definitions, and for those of you that are already farther along, I apologize, but I think I want to keep it simple to start with, and just start with an assumption that we're making here is that if we agree on where we want to go, we have a better chance of getting there. And a second assumption is that if we think logically about the future and the effects of things they're going to have on what we want to achieve, that we can influence that future a little bit. So that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to get a handle on what's coming up and taking a step back, looking at it, and then say, so how do we influence that future? Another way strategic planning is a term that's used a lot for that, and I've tried to explain it various ways. I'll try this one on you tonight, and then if that doesn't work, I'll come up with another one next time I'm with you. But imagine that you're trying to get to a mountain, and you're in a forest, and occasionally you climb a tree to look at that mountain. That's the strategic planning to make sure you're going in the right direction. If you keep going down, taking a step, and climbing a tree and looking again, you're going to waste your time. And if you never climb up again, you're going to get lost in the blackberries. So you're occasionally hacking your way through the blackberries, but then you come up for a view and say, am I still on track? This is what we're trying to do with the strategic plan. Take a step back, look out long run, and try to figure out if we're still moving in the right direction. So that's the concept that we're working with on strategic planning. City manager already described what we're trying to do here. We're thinking about this plan as a tool for making decisions in the future. And I'll describe to you what we mean by that tool. This diagram is showing what our process is in concept. And it's not all the steps we're taking, but it's how the pieces relate at the end. There is something called a strategic plan. And that is a document that talks about what the city is trying to achieve over a 5-year period. And in that, there are, as Steve pointed out, there are sets of, sometimes there are goals, there are value statements, but ultimately it is a set of actions that have a priority over a 5-year period. That plan has to be supported by a long-run financial plan, because otherwise you just have an idea and you've got no way to deal with it. So think of that as those two bubbles on the left as the 5-year piece. Where these plans get in trouble is when you stop there, because the 5-year strategic plan then can get forgotten, and people move on to the budget cycle. You're the budget committee. And the way the thing gets traction is when the council is actually doing an annual work plan that ties into the strategic plan and says, to meet these objectives that are in our 5-year plan, this year we are going to be working on these things. And that is our directive. And then the budget committee and the city staff and the staff departments know what it is that are the council policy priorities, and they come back with their own work plans then and the budget to try to implement that. Supporting that, and that work plan happens annually, and it gets adjusted every year. Supporting that strategic plan and that work plan are some processes that have to be in place. And you have to have a good decision-making process, you've got to have training on how to use it, and you've got to have an evaluation of how well you're doing. We are going to deliver something related to all these bubbles here. The way we're going to deliver it is more or less in this order. Steve referred to the situation assessment. That's where we are right now. What is the situation? And then we go on to the strategic plan, the transition, and the processes. So in the situation assessment, we're looking at how the city is doing right now, but we're also looking at factors that the city might have control over, that are internal to the city, that may affect how well the city can perform. And we're looking at factors that are external to the city. The economy being a typical one, changes in the environment if you're looking long enough, any of those types of things. So that's where we are, and I'm going to come back and talk to you about that in a little bit more. The situation assessment is what sets up the strategic plan. If this is where we are, and these are the factors out there that are important, that are going to be influencing how we can achieve what we want, what are we going to do? What do we see as our mission? What's our vision about what we want to achieve, and what are our values? And then what are our goals over the next 5 years? And importantly, those goals get translated into actions. Here are some specific actionable items that we want to work on. And eventually, those are what get pulled into the next thing, the work plan. And in the first year, we're calling that a transition plan, because this will be a new process for the city. This does not exist right now as we understand it. As we understand it, there are some goals out there, and then there is a budget process, and the budget process really is the policy document. So getting to this work plan is an important issue, we believe. And to do that, the first year, it's going to be some work, so we're calling it a transition plan. What will the city do in year one to achieve its strategic plan? And then in addition, we've got these processes, which is how does the city continue to do its best work? These things about how are we doing the decision making? What kind of information does the council want from the staff? What kind of direction does the staff want from the council? All of those types of things we will be addressing in one form or another. So who gets involved in this? Well, there are at least three broad groups: the council, and I should say, and its committees, the staff, and the community. And the community we break out into stakeholders, which I think that term is familiar to you. It usually means people that represent interest groups of one form or another that have an interest in what the city's doing, and then the public in general. All of these will get involved with this process. With the council, we'll be in work sessions with the council at some point. We've already begun one-on-one interviews. We've done one-on-one interviews. There will be more to come. That's the main council involvement. With the staff, there is something called the core team, which in general means department heads that we have met with at the kickoff meeting. We have have not implemented anything yet, something called an ambassador group. That is a group of around 20, maybe more people throughout the organization, at all levels in the organization, that have been picked as people that are willing to go out and talk to people and push information in both directions. What is it that this process is doing? What is it that they're concerned about, so that the process can understand how we can better accommodate it? And finally, there's the community, and this is what the BSD is doing, and having a series of charrette or workshops, open houses, surveys. We talked about that briefly, and I'll tell you what's coming up, and other one-on-one interviews. That's how we get people involved in the process. Some of the key elements in phase one, going back to this slide right here, when I said the situation assessment is really phase one. And then phase two is the strategic plan, phase three is the transition, and the processes are embedded in all of these. So we're in phase one right now. And in phase one, we've had the kickoff meeting. That was a little over a month ago, where we met with city staff, the core team, and met with the ambassador group at that point. We then conducted 3 days of one-on-one interviews. We did somewhere a little over 40 interviews. Mike Gleason, and Brian Scott of BSD did those interviews, and we're going to report a little bit on that tonight. And now we're here meeting with you tonight. This is actually our first public outing on this, trying to give an overview of what's up. And in early December, the resident survey will be deployed. We will get those results back just in time to have then this stakeholder charrette and open house, where we'll also be meeting with the core team and the ambassador group in the middle of December. A key point for me to emphasize right now is that we have not completed the situation assessment. We are, and I wouldn't even say we're not quite to the middle of it yet. We've taken the first step on doing the interviews. We've started reviewing city documents. And what I'm about to show you then are some preliminary ideas, just to give you a taste of what's coming up. But we can't complete the situation assessment until after we hear from the stakeholders again at the charrette. So the people invited will be the people that we've talked to individually, but we have not told them collectively what we have found and seen how they respond to it. So that's part of our process. So that's where we are right now. I want to hit briefly on a couple of, on just a few interim findings. And you can imagine what this is like. We had 3 people doing, with 3 assistants taking notes on 45 interviews. And that was a free-form interview. I mean, we had a script. We tried to get information in the right place, but we then had to come back. It's not like we could push some buttons and get the arithmetic to come up and have it as a survey. So we had to go through it and try to pull out of it what we thought was important. And there was a lot there. And a lot of it was on internal city processes, and we're not here to talk to you about that tonight because that's less of a budget committee interest, I think, than the things we're going to talk about, which is what are people thinking about some of the key city services. And what we found in trying to group things together was that an interesting way to think about it was that a lot of the things had to do with some aspect of growth or development. And you'll see that it's, when I bring these up, that things like infrastructure and things show up. And so let me just show these to you. The first one is about growth. And some residents want to grow little at all or slower, and others want to expand. So this is kind of a classic debate in cities that we have worked with, where we've done a lot of growth management work on, are we going to have a more constrained type of development, or are we going to encourage growth and stimulate it with various economic development packages? Whoops, excuse me, wrong way. Second one is infrastructure, a challenge that Salem has and is typical of most of the cities that we're dealing with these days, is a combination of budget constraints and facing deferred maintenance, which is one way that they've made the budget work up until now, and then at the same time that their maintenance deficit is growing, so growth is coming, and now they need more infrastructure in addition. That's a challenge. In the downtown, a lot of people talking about the importance of a vibrant and active downtown, and some suggestions for including that, for improving that, include a broad range of things. I've just put a few of them up here on the slide for you. Housing showed up quite a few times with people on concerns about housing, and kind of in two parts. What they saw as the problems, and a real concern about affordable housing, and as a subset of that, homelessness and the impacts of homelessness on other aspects of quality of life. And then the opportunity there, which is the potential for adding housing in the downtown area to activate that area and hit that vibrancy that people were talking about in the previous one of these. Two issues that came up that are not city services that I felt was worth pointing out to you here because people care about it, and they felt that it affected them quite a bit. One was the relative lack of mental health care, a major issue, and its impact on homelessness and therefore the quality of life issues. And another one that came up, I don't know the number, I'll say in over half of the survey, somebody mentioned it, was transit. And the amount and quality of access to transit and how that impacts livability and the effectiveness of city services. So these 6 items, they are not the final 6. They're just here to kind of give you a feel of what we're hearing when we've talked to, spent well, I guess that would be 9 person days talking to people about stuff. And now, then I'll close with just a reminder of where our next steps are. Survey goes out in December, and then we're having this charrette in the middle of December. In January, we will have a draft of our situational assessment done. That'll go through staff review. Eventually, we'll, at some date, maybe the 17th or another one, we'll be in front of City Council talking about that situational assessment. Staff may report back to the Budget Committee on that. Once we get the situational assessment done, then we're ready to say, okay, let's start on the strategic plan. Our tentative schedule is to have a draft of that in May. Once we have a strategic plan done, then it's trying to figure out how do we take the key items out of the strategic plan to develop that transition plan or that first year work plan. That's where we are right now. That's my 15 minutes. I think we are at your pleasure here, available here to answer questions if you choose, and maybe I'll ask Mike and Alexander to come up in case you have anything to say.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, for your presentation. Lewis, thank you. When you're up here, it all goes away.
They thought it was just me.
Actually, I've got just one question. It's about the resident survey. Is that information going to be assimilated and distributed at the stakeholder meeting on the 15th?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we will get, it's a very tight schedule. You can imagine that with our schedule and the elections, trying to decide when we were going to do this thing was a source of some conversation.
Okay.
But we decided that DHM said they could get it done. They're on that schedule. We will be getting their results back, probably 3 or 4 days before that meeting. But we will be summarizing those and presenting those as part of the meeting.
Okay, good.
Member Anderson.
Thank you, Terry. I'm interested in the, your summarizations, the last 3 or 4 of your slides. And my question is, with whom did you speak in those 45 interviews? I know it was the counselors, I know it was the department heads, but that's 15 people maybe. So who are the other 30 people with whom you spoke?
I don't, you're probably not asking me to name
I don't want the names, I want the categories, yeah. I want names and numbers and addresses.
Results?
Yeah.
But we will be, I mean, we can certainly share that list with you, that's no problem.
No, I read the category.
Categories of people would be people that were representing other institutions, so school district, things like that. People that were representing neighborhood groups.
Okay.
People that worked for neighborhood groups or worked on specific causes like homelessness, or something like that. People that had previous experience with the city, either in some cases as prior council members, in other cases as now advocates for certain positions in terms of growth and development in the city. And, on the one side, that growth issue is there. Some people that thought it should be a little bit slower or different, and then, on the other side, Chamber of Commerce. So a pretty broad cross-section that we spent quite a bit of time with the city staff trying to articulate. And
Faith community, social services.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are the people that you characterized as stakeholders when you were earlier talking?
Yes.
And then how did you get the names of the non-council, non-staff folks who you ended up being interviewing?
That was a staff process, a city staff process.
Okay, so the city staff said, here are some people who might represent these various groups, and we think you ought to talk to them.
Well, it was a little more iterative than that. We said...
Iterative? Good. What's that word mean?
It went in steps.
Okay.
We said, here are the categories of things that we would typically interview, but we don't know Salem. Who are the people that fit into these categories? And they said, here are people that fit into those categories, and by the way, we think you should talk to these people also, and because you forgot that category. And we said, oh, right, okay. So that was it.
Thanks. Further discussion, Member Bailey.
Just to help me understand, clearly the context of the community, as you've just described, is essential to this, but am I right that the primary target, the primary audience for the strategic plan is the city council, is the city government? This is not a community visioning plan per se. It's more of how do we make the governance part of, or the government part of the city of Salem match with the community and its environment.
I think that's a good clarification that I would agree with. We have done, you can do strategic planning for anything. We've done strategic plans for economic development. We've done strategic plans for long-run development process and land use, et cetera. I think I agree with you that here our focus is much more on the internal governance issues, and in particular, what services is the city providing, what services do citizens want, and what ways can the city provide the services the city wants, the citizens want more efficiently or more fairly. So that's, and in that sense, this is clearly it will almost certainly overlap some notion of vision, and maybe that will come out. We're in the process of reviewing documents now to see if there is a vision implied in other documents, and we will be in front of council, and if the council decides that a vision statement is something important for them to do as part of this, that to be determined also. But I think you're right that we are on, focusing on the governance. I don't know, Mike or Alexander, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, at your work session on the 17th for council, we will be going through a mission, vision, values exercise. So that is something that we've articulated in our scope of work, we've budgeted for, and we understand will be an important piece that will guide the choices around the strategic plan. But it is ultimately a council document to own.
Member Moore Green.
Thank you. Would you speak to the activity that's going to be taking place on December 4th? It's titled Resident Survey Deployed.
I'm sorry, would we do what? Explain it?
Yes, would you give me some fill-in on that?
Yeah, sure. This is, the city went out with a scope of work, and in their scope of work, they said, among the things that we need are some resident surveys, statistically valid surveys. So in response to that, we put together a team that included DHM, which it specializes in doing random sample surveys. So we're doing 2 surveys during this process. This is the first one. The first one is doing some benchmark questions with citizens about how well they think things are going in general, which DHM can then compare to having asked that question before in Salem and also asked it around the state. And then there are questions about specific city services. How well do citizens, how much do they use them? Of the ones that they use, what do they think about them? And then there are some, and a couple of trade-off questions about, how would you rank these services? And then it ends with some standard demographic questions so that we are able to tabulate how certain demographic groups feel about certain issues. The sample will be on the order of 400, which at the level of detail that we are asking the questions is deemed to be plus or minus roughly 5% in terms of validity. Does that help answer?
Well, yes. So it's not a survey that's going to go out to all residents or taxpayers?
It will be randomly selected.
And how will they be selected? What is your premise for finding those people?
DHM has, they will typically go to a service that has very large databases that they then start usually a random dialing process going. And there's some other tricks, and that's why we hire them. I don't know all the details, but they have to sample for demographics. They will be trying to get a match, a very rough match, so that it is geographically there's representation that approximates Salem's averages by geography, by age, sex, and race, usually are the 4 that we're dealing with.
Member Anderson.
I wanted to follow up a bit on this question about who you interviewed. I presume you also interviewed the incoming counselors?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Member Bailey.
Just one more thing, and maybe this is more for the council than you folks, but I'm looking at these 4 slides of some preliminary conclusions based on the discussions that you've had so far. And I'm seeing such a congruence, such an overlap in the question about slower growth, expansion, infrastructure, housing, vibrant downtown core, that I think it's probably will be tempting to get carried away that those are entire planning processes on its own. But I would hope that you would point those out in this process, that there are arenas where the city could benefit from additional focused planning to address, for instance, these very 4, above and beyond just the governance and how city council and city services could work better. But I think those right there are so revealing to me about some potentials for the way the city of Salem moves forward, government and citizens alike. So I'm totally intrigued by what you've found already.
It's a good opportunity to express to you how this will actually mechanically work between the city council, the city staff, and budget committees and other committees. Assuming this data turns out to be illuminating, we hope it is, and then the council goes through their deliberative process, and we've got a decision-making model to try and help them with that. Then they will choose these topics. They will then have some actionable characters to them. They will become part of the staff's work program as well as the council's work program. So let's, for instance, say homeless and affordable housing gets high on the list. What will come out at the end of that is some deliverable product that will reflect the organization's capacity to perform around that based on measurements that have been in place based on the strategic planning process. So, and that's where the priority process becomes very, I'll use the word again, Tom, iterative, because the staff will come back and say, well, we only have so much horsepower capacity-wise. We have, 3,200 person hours to do this thing, and that's not going to get us there. And then that'll incur the conversation so that the plan is grounded in budget and planning.
I think a secondary point, I think Mike's explanation of the mechanics is really important to the question of content. Will this be just about process, or will it deal with those substantive issues? It will look at both. In some cases, though, I will say some of the actions that we find to be most successful are planning actions. So we may have an action that says, we're going to take this step and implement this program, and here are the details. But there are some cases where a full plan is really needed, and that will take more time and more staff resources than are really appropriate for this type of citywide plan. And in such cases, we will have an action that will say, this is the type of additional planning or forecasting we would recommend you do. Here's the question it should answer. And here's some details about who should do that, when they should do that, and potentially some cost numbers so that that can get then worked into your budgeting process.
I was going to take a step back. I think I interrupted you early on, Terry. Could you introduce your two associates and what their role is within the team?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, this is Alexandra Reese. She is what we term project manager. I'm termed project director. So I'm kind of at the top of this, thinking about it broadly, but if you don't want me managing your project, you want Alexandra managing it, because she's into every detail. And particularly if you have Mike Gleason on the team, you want Alexandra managing the project, because you absolutely do not want Mike having anything to do with schedules. Mike, I introduced as former city manager, small cities and large throughout Oregon, his last 20 or so years with the city of Eugene. Mike and I go back quite a ways, but one of the places that we do come back to is the city of Salem. We did all the market analysis and all the negotiations with Steve Johnson that led to that convention center there. It was the last project that we did with Salem.
Member Peterson?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm going to sound like devil's advocate here for a minute. And looking at the preliminary findings, your interim findings, looking at pages 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I don't know a city or a town in Oregon that wouldn't give you these exact same answers. So I'm wondering if you have some questions to probe to our community that are going to teach us something other than what we already know, because we know this inside and out. Mm-hmm. And our council has been grappling with these issues inside and out, as our city manager for the last year. I was optimistic that what you're going to do is to discover some new things that will help us do something differently than we've been doing, so we don't just keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect some different outcome.
No pressure.
Okay, we began the project a month ago, and we knew that we had to come and make this presentation, and we said, well, what we're prepared to talk about is the process that we're using and where we are in that process. But we have done these interviews. We have not finished the situational assessment. Are there any high-level ideas that come out of that? And so we wrote up a bunch of stuff, and when we distilled it down to something simple that we could fit on a slide, this is what we ended up with, which I would concur with you sounds similar to a lot of other places, but it's not identical. The one that we have up there right now on transit.
Yeah, I said, with the exception of that page,
okay.
the rest of them just sound like what we already know and what every city in this state expressed at the League of Oregon Cities Conference.
That may be, and all I can tell you is that is what we heard from people. We have more work to do on that. It is not primarily our job to do this part of the work. Our primary job is to work on city process and city services. But I believe that there will be issues that I'll agree with you that any council faces, but I certainly have worked with councils where there were strong majorities that we should go in this direction or strong majorities that we should go in that direction. I think it's quite possible that's not a situation that you're going to be in, and a lot of these issues on which way we're going to go are going to be difficult discussions. We're identifying some of the things that are out there. I think the one thing that maybe it's not an insight, but I'll put it out there, and that is that I said it before, a lot of these things that seemed like we're not going to solve this because these people strongly believe this, have this ideological opinion, and these people have this ideological opinion. What we found was, and what we usually find is, as you dig down into it beyond the ideologies and say, well, it sounds like what you're saying is you got a problem with this pattern of growth. Yeah, I do. Okay, well, then you start getting down past the ideology to, okay, what is the problem with that pattern of growth? What would be acceptable? And what we're seeing is a lot of stuff here that has to do with the kind of growth that Salem's going to have. Now, that is true of a lot of cities also, but that is, I think, pretty central to what the city needs to think about as it's putting together services, because most of the services it's putting together are to serve either existing development or new growth. So to summarize, yes, you're right, and you've put us on notice that we better do better than this. And we will.
Yeah, I think that's probably it in a nutshell, but
let me just take a...
Yeah.
I doubt that we'll produce a novel dilemma or discover a novel. There might be one out there. What we're trying to do is connect with the community, connect with the council and the leadership in the community, and get something that people go, okay, yeah, I understand. That's useful, yeah. Now, what the heck are we going to do about it? How do we go about doing the right thing at the council level, collective? How do you make that collective decision? And then how are we certain that our organization is doing the best they can, the best available practice to intervene? And then how do we measure whether or not we're making any impact? And then next year, we climb back up on that tree and we look at it. So we are trying to build a foundational system for you that will allow you to govern the institution that you're responsible for in a more effective and more elegant way than you have before. It will not fix everything. It will not generate a unique magic pill for homelessness, but it will give you a set of tools that will be unique. We do this a lot, but there are the majority of institutions, public and private, very rarely connect up their strategic governance thinking with their management, productivity, and implementation. So that's really the tool we're building. The assessment is the first part of setting that up.
Well, I'm very interested in your comments, and this is crucially important for our community and for our city and for our city council and for our city manager and city staff. And I do applaud the city manager for going ahead with this. We all did, and I think it's the right thing to do. But getting back to a key comment that was just made, and that was my question to you is, what questions are you going to ask and where are you going to go to find out what practices and cultures are in our city government that may be holding us back? Which things should we be doing differently so we can get a different outcome down the road than we've been getting?
So I think if I could speak a little bit to our project process, that might address some of your questions about how we're delving into issues and then how we're going to get to resolution.
Well, not just issues. I'm saying, how are you going to look at how our city functions, how our staff function, how the council functions? I thought that was part of this strategic plan. Okay, tell me how you're going to do that.
That is absolutely part of the plan. So our situation assessment has 3 broad components in what it looks at. It looks at what's going on with city services, both internal and external. It looks at what are you doing now, what have we heard residents like, what do they think could be done a little better. And then it looks at external conditions, so what's happening externally that might impact service provision in the future. And it also looks at, as you mentioned, the process piece. So on the service-related set is what we focused on tonight, because that was where we thought the group as a whole, including other community members, would have an interest. And just a point on these all went to our survey company, DHM, and we have developed some sets of questions to get at community values around these particular issues. So once the survey comes back, that's when we'll have a much more well-rounded perspective of where the city sits on these particular issues that really are questions every city deals with. And I'll let Mike, who's our city manager expert, speak a little bit about how he's been thinking about the process assessment.
Well, Madam Mayor, you are point on. If we walk out the door and you have not confidence that the systems that you've developed gives you a better hammer to solve and work on these problems, we failed. And the hammer includes, first and foremost, the capacity of the council to choose and focus its work program. Right now, you probably are confronted, and I used to describe it to the councilors, the first couple of months on this council, you're going to think you're drinking out of a fire hose. What we want to do is get a valve on that fire hose. 2 kinds of valves. One that you can control what it is you're focused on and make that decision strategically. The work plan will literally come down to those things you're going to look at meeting by meeting over the next year, that detailed. That'll also come down to the staff's capacity to respond to that in terms of analytical capacity and resource review. A good example was the budget work you had done right here. You've been working on that piece of financial reporting system for the better part of 5 years, I know. It was a wonderful piece of work. Your strategic plan is, I mean, your whole view is really quite remarkable. I haven't seen 10 cities out of 100 that does the kind of financial reporting system you're doing. That's what I mean by creating a design so the whole organization has that ability to focus, and the key focus is from the council. If you want productivity in an organization, it begins and ends at the city council. Because when the council is interested in productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness, when they start measuring outcomes and they start focusing their work plan, the organization will respond. So I applaud exactly your point of view. This is not an exercise in academics, and it's not an exercise in trying to figure out who's happy and who isn't. This is an exercise in getting the city council the levers to make the institution respond the way they choose it to respond.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I just had a quick comment. On slide 10, I was a little surprised by it. We want to make Salem have a more vibrant and active urban core. I know that I've been working on this for 10, 12 years and have gone from 6 housing units downtown to several hundred now. Sidewalks that used to roll up at 5:30 in the evening. I was just interested to see, this seems to be one of the core that you sent on for the demographic analysis, yet it seems to be, I thought we had done this, even though we could do more, but I thought we've done this already.
Yeah, so Mike and I did a lot of our stakeholder interviews together, and some of those were with Willamette and other people who work downtown from the chamber, for example. And the first thing they said was there's been a tremendous amount of improvement, and this is a wonderful place to live. So the comments around downtown vibrancy aren't to say that the city hasn't done a great job already. The comments were, boy, I think there's potential that we could just do that much better. So I think this brings up an important point about the situation assessment and then the strategic plan as a whole, which is it's not just about dealing with obvious challenges, but it's also looking at what's going well and where there are opportunities to build on that success. And that's one example of the latter category.
Further questions? Okay, seeing none, you have any concluding comments?
Yeah, one concluding comment. The first question we got, we never answered, I think, which was, is the survey that we're doing different from the survey? We do, and yes, yes it is. I mean, there's some, DHM has looked at that survey. In fact, DHM did that survey? Yeah, DHM did that survey. Right. So they're not asking the same questions, except in a couple places where they can benchmark off of that. So I think it is going to be different, and it's going to be focused on the parts of it are going to be focused on the kinds of questions that we have up here. With that,
Member Benjamin.
Five-year forecast sounds good, except for we just had almost half our council replaced. And then in 2 more years, who knows what that looks like. Taking into account that some of these concerns about housing being too expensive, let's say, and finding ways to lower rents or whatnot. 11, 12 years ago, that wasn't much of an issue until growth started happening, or not growth, but there's a stagnant growth, and so then everything was getting filled up, and then the rents started going higher. The same people that want to have better controls on rent, if you will, of some sort, are against growth. And so the way the council has any kind of mechanisms to be able to control how much does it cost to live in an apartment in Salem is to allow developers to develop apartment complexes so there's more supply to satiate the demand. And so that's kind of when you have these questions that go out there. Everybody would love to have more buses. I mean, I would. I'd love to have everybody have lower cost of living in regards to rental apartment. And I'd love to keep it like Mayberry. But you can't have all those without having development. So I just kind of curious about some of these questions that are going out to the stakeholders, because they're always going to say the same thing. As the mayor pointed out, everybody's got these same issues. But I think it's more of the education of educating the citizenry. Is like, well, you know, we need to grow to be able to lower apartment rents and, of course, make it more viable for public transportation to start taking more route. Yeah, well, at the same time, maybe it makes it less desirable. I don't know, you know? So that's what my curiosity was. On the timeline, looking at a 5-year forecast, even though things are going to be changing, and economically they're going to change too. Because we're having a boom in regards to building permits and whatnot and multifamily housing, and we'll continue to pressure that, well, then the information collected this year may be different next year or the year after. So I'm kind of, I guess, drilling down to the ideas, like instead of looking at a 5-year forecast per se, more of a year to year. Because everybody will always say government moves like pond water. And so what we're planning on today and eventually get to a year from now for a 5-year forecast, things can be slightly different to, by the end of the 5 years, we're way off course. The mountain is way over there. That's all I'm getting at.
Well, I will tell you that right now I'm working on 2 different plans, one in Portland and one in Atlanta, where we are looking out 50 years. And I'm not saying that we know what we're doing. I'm saying that when you do that, it's a pretty interesting exercise to see how different the opinions are about what's going to happen. And so the way that you do that, and if we're successful with the Beaverton School District, it will be, let's look at what's happening with demographics, let's look at what's happening with the educational models, let's look at what's happening with our facilities and the cost of facilities inside the urban growth boundary, and let's just push it out there and see what happens. Is that a future that you want? And it's not that that's a future that you're going to get. These are just, we refer to them as crash test dummies. I mean, we're putting a bunch of assumptions together and running them into the wall and see how bad it looks. And then people say, wow, that's not what I want, or that's not what I thought would happen. But where the action is then is coming back and saying, well, that's not very useful, but what are we going to do now? And the answer is, it's useful when what you do now changes a little bit when you see what path, you know, might be out there under these different things. So I agree with your point that we can't, I rarely use the term forecast anymore. I use the term simulation, which is kind of cheating, but it's like, here's one thing under a set of assumptions, here's what the future might look like. What do you think about that? Do you like it? And how reasonable do you think it is? How likely do you think it is? So you're going to continually, when Mike talks about continuous improvement and ongoing evaluation, that's part of what we're talking about also. You have to reevaluate these things. But the thing that we are most hopeful about, and we don't know whether we can achieve it or not, and if the council wants to get there, but it's our assignment, is to say, if we can get to an idea of what this council would like to do over the next 2 to 5 years and get into a work program for 1 year, then after you have that work program, for that year, for that first year, it's going to be pretty good because we're going to have a lot of information. And what's going to happen during that year is stuff that is not on the council's list is going to come up. And it's going to happen the next year and the year after that. And by having that work program, what it allows is a certain discipline for the council to say, is what just came up to us more important than what we have on our strategic plan? And if it is, we will substitute it in. And if it's not, what else, you know, and what are we going to take out if we're going to put this in? Or are we going to say, thank you very much, we'll consider that for next year's work plan? So I think I'm generally agreeing with you. I don't have, I believe that markets do change around pretty quickly, but I think if you don't do this, you don't have a place to stand from to make your decisions, your short-run decisions.
Member McQuaid.
To Councilor Benjamin's point to a degree, and then sort of, I guess, I'll just sound off. I think this is great. I got here, and one of the things, you know, this is my second full year. I'm about done. In my first year, I was just sort of amazed that we went through this budget process. We just sort of came in here with seat of the pants. Let's see what happens. We got these great numbers, but as a group, we were rolling out a budget, and we didn't. I don't know that we had a real goal. Our goal is we want the city to operate effectively and be funded properly to deliver those services. That's a great overarching goal, but when you get to specifics, how do you get there? We weren't there. We were sort of depending on the staff, and then sort of complaining that, well, geez, we're not getting much input into the process. Well, this does that, and that's, so, and the other thing is, you can't say you're representing the citizens if you don't ask the citizens what it is that they want and what they believe and what they want their community to look like. We're representatives of them. We're not the people figuring it out and doing it for them. So this is a wonderful thing. I think long-term it's going to be great for two reasons. You have 3 new counselors coming in, and if this was 2 or 3 years down the road, they'd have a structure that they got trained in and explained to, and here's where we're at and how we got there, and they can insert themselves in that and be more effective quicker than I think I've been, you've been, or, our 3 new guys that came in were. I think we're now up to speed, but we're almost 2 years in and now sort of starting to figure out what we're doing. So this is just a way, I think, to make everybody more effective. Okay, I'm up to speed, you're not. That's okay. So anyway, I think this is great. I thank Steve Powers for bringing this up. I think it's sorely needed, and I think the city and this group of people and the council are going to benefit it both short and long term.
So I had a question, and it comes back to...
Well, you started that. I'll get after you.
Okay. The question, in early December, you're going to roll out a survey to the residents of this community. 400-ish is what I'm hearing. Those questions that are being asked, are we going to have, is the council or the budget committee going to have an input on the, I would say more pointedly, the council have any input onto the questions that will be asked? Will they be shown to us before they go out?
At this point, no. That's not part of the plan.
Do you want a opportunity to review?
Find out what we want to know. Right? Well.
I will comment on the design of the survey just to assuage any concerns you have about the content. It's a 15-minute survey, which means we're pretty restricted in the number of questions that we can ask. And DHM, this is all they do, is survey work. And a big portion of the survey work that they do is these types of general community surveys to inform city strategic planning processes. So Terry went through the segments of the survey, and just to refresh you, there are some general satisfaction questions. How is the city doing? And then there are some questions generally about services. We've tried to be pretty comprehensive in including all the external services on the table for residents to comment on. We've asked some general trade-off questions, and those are all questions that are important because they allow the city to do benchmarking. And the phrasing with those is also important, not only for the city itself to do benchmarking of its own performance over time, but to be able to benchmark against other cities. And that's about 75% of your surveys, those questions plus demographics. And those are pretty standard. That final set gets to these key issues that have come up around external service provision. And those have gone through some revision by staff, and that I would say is a very small number of questions that's really on the table around unique issue-specific questions.
Well, to answer the question, do we want to see the survey? Yes, we do want to see the survey, and I'll tell you why. Because the minute people out in the community get the survey, they're going to ask one and more of us, oh, what's the survey all about? I got the survey. What is this? What is that? My neighbor's getting a survey. If we don't know what are on those survey questions, we can't speak intelligently with our community. And we are ultimately responsible for what's being asked out in that community.
That's very true. And I don't think there'll be, and I'll speak out of turn here.
And I don't mean we want to write the survey. I'm just saying we can't be in the dark.
Yeah, I want to speak to this. I'm going to speak out of turn because I'll probably be wrong, and then Terry can step up here and grab me by the collar. I don't think there's a problem in sharing the questions. Creating questions by committee is deadly. So, and I agree with you, counselors I mean, people have no idea what it's like to be a city councilor or mayor until you are one. And it's a 24-hour job. And the craziest questions come up. So let's say we're going to work on that. I think the answer is I can't see that that's a problem. Also, I want you to understand that the statistical survey is more of a benchmark than it is a database. That is, what we're trying to do is get a comparative, and there's lots of other data that's coming into you. I mean, interviewing, as I recall, Terry, was 51, not 41, but anyway, interviewing people, and I've done a lot of interviewing around cities over my 50 years in the business, and you had some very unique comments that came in. You are idiosyncratic in some ways. So that data will be enriched by the statistical data, but it won't be sufficient either. And then there is the staff interviewing and the staff work, and that data is also very important. And then finally, the most important data that sits in this room is city councilors and budget committee members. You are the human beings that are charged with the rather awesome job of going out and collecting references and then comparing them to the data we present to you. You will never get a complete picture. But as you develop your strategic skills as an institution, not just as individuals, you will become better at examining data in a way that will give you richer choices. And then you'll become better at making collective decisions. That's the comprehensive, continuous improvement element that will be in this piece.
So I have three people up next, Lewis, Benjamin, and Nankib. So go with, okay, so we'll go over to Benjamin, member Benjamin.
Just a little bit concerned or bringing a caution in using the survey outfit D, what is it, D what?
DHM.
DHM, okay. So I'm understanding they're going to robo-dial, if you will, and try to get samples throughout the community in the various wards, and of course demographics is very important. I get that. I think there should be more demographics released in that robo-dialing, but just starting with the calling, that's just for like hardline phones.
It includes cell phones also.
It does. Okay, good. Thank you. That was something I was concerned about, because if anybody does have a dial-up phone anymore, there you go. So,
quick, let me get your picture.
Yeah. Typically the time of day when it's being called, and then of course who's going to answer it, and if they answer it, are they going to answer the questions? Typically, no. So then it just dilutes the I guess the pool there to a point where whoever is going to answer it, are you employed? What's your age? Are you retired? Are you in the workforce, or you're not in the workforce? And those particular demographics are going to have a far different outlook on city services than those going to the 9-to-5 grind. They just want to have their no potholes, and I want less traffic. So I can get to work and then make things work for us in the city so that we can be successful. So there's different ways to look at that, and that's what I was just concerned about, the sampling that we come in and the information we get. And so far I've seen it, it kind of leans toward, well, we don't want any more growth, we do want some growth, we need better public transportation, we need lower costs of housing, homelessness, all that stuff is, well, that always is going to come out to those same demographics, if you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think there are two questions I want to address here, or two topics. One would be the survey sampling methodology and how we deploy the survey. And the second would be how we phrase the questions. I'll take the deployment one first. They do the phone calls both in evenings and weekends, and I can speak to them about the ability to include a question around employment status. I don't have the demographic list of questions in front of me, but I'm happy to put that on our checklist to see if that's something we could include. And I take your point about question phrasing pretty sincerely, that it's been our experience, if you have someone like us come in and ask and phrase the questions, you often will get questions that, boy, wouldn't everyone just want to solve homelessness. And DHM is keenly aware of that issue. So we have been very careful to take these key issues and address them in a way that really gets to a question that will show preferences around policy choices that would have implications, but we aren't asking people questions like, do you want to end homelessness? Because we already know the answer there. So that's something that we have been keenly aware of, and I think we communicated that both to Courtney and Steve about how these issues were getting addressed. So I'm optimistic that we'll get some really helpful insight on these subjects.
And when you get to the decision-making side of that, when the council's deciding and weighing those questions, both the statistical data, the non-statistical, but idiosyncratic data, and your own experiences, you get the lead.
Right.
That's what the choices are. And the nice thing about it is, now you will have a known quantity, and that may cause a whole nother set of discussions in the community, which is exactly what we want that to be. So, yeah, there is no perfect data collection system, there's no perfect decision-making system, and there is no perfect response. But you can set up a system where you become better at it, and where the staff becomes better at it, and where you become more thoughtful about it. And that's about all we can get.
Member Necke?
Thank you, and Alexander did a great job on the survey piece. We've had DHM come in and talk to us for several of the bond committees that we've been on. I think we were given questions one time as they went out, or they were forwarded to us, but for the most part it was going through them and having us ask questions based on the results. They do it for a living. And for the most part, we never see the questions on the upfront. Their experience is such that having us review them and say yes or no wouldn't. I trust them implicitly with the questions that they will ask based on their previous history. That being said, like I say, they have in the past let us see them, so when people ask, we can know what the questions were. The other side of that is when we haven't had the questions, like, yeah, we're doing a survey based on this to find out the citizen perspective on this, this, and this. No, and I don't know what the questions are. We don't have to. The results will be when we can actually dig down. And exactly what Councilor Benjamin was going to. It's like, what time of day were you calling? How are you trying to reach all of these different demographics inside of the community? And they make good money at it because they do it very well. And then the last thing, if I can, Eco Northwest has developed several other tools for us that have been in play for a decade or more. One having to do with the cost of growth and annexation. So I think the tool that we get out of this, as Mr. Gleason said, if it doesn't work for us after they leave, they failed. And I don't believe they'll fail at this. They do their job very well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that tool functions. And I'm sure you are too.
Just one point of clarification on that. I think Mike said this, so I won't dwell on it. We're a little bit pushed by a schedule that has, invitations out to people and trying to get the survey done in time for that. So getting into a long back and forth on wording the survey questions, it would be difficult. I don't have any problem at all once we get the survey done, which, and before we send it, before we start dialing people up, getting it out. I mean, the city staff will have it, and the city staff can certainly share it with you. Potentially we could get it to you enough in advance so if you're really seriously concerned about some question, we could do something with it. But I don't think we can commit at this point to making that deadline and having a longer process to deal with that.
Well, I'm going to say something that everybody is probably going to think is really rude. Do you work for the city council or do you work for the staff?
have a contract with the city, and we, I think, understand pretty clearly who runs the city.
I hope so. And this council very, very much wants to be engaged, and we want to do a better job. That's part of what this whole thing is about. But there's no reason why we shouldn't see the survey. And if we have questions we really want asked out there, there may be some things we really wanted to find out so that we can go forward. We should be able to suggest those topics for questions. I don't want to write the questions, but we should be able to suggest some topics.
If, you know, I think I leave that to you and the city manager to decide how you want to proceed on that, and then give us the direction that you want, and we will do what we can to accommodate that request.
Okay.
Which may include, depending upon what you're requesting and how much feedback and back and forth you want, changing the schedule.
Yeah, well, that may, a schedule would probably be easier to change than questions, but I want to hold firm that we have a chance to look at that, and we have a chance to put in a few topics. If we think we want to know more from our community about some things so that we can strategically plan, we need to be able to say, hey, what about this topic and that issue? That's all I'm trying to get across.
Before I move on to Member Lewis, I had a question or a concern or a correction on slide 12. It talked about the relative lack of mental health. It's not a city of Salem issue as it impacts homelessness and the quality of life issues. I don't know if you're aware that we're going through a process now called the Mid-Willamette Homeless Initiative Task Force, and it'll be disbanding in February, but we've actually come to some very fruitful things that might actually help, not directly mental health, but to facilitate the bridging of the different silos of the different sources that are out there. And I just want to make sure that you know about that, because there's been a lot of effort. Our county commissioners are on it, our mayors of both this and Kaiser, and a lot of very knowledgeable people.
Courtney sent me a great update on that, so we have that. And as Terry mentioned, we started with interviews. We are now rounding out what we've found, vetting it, seeing if there are new things to bring to the table with a document scan. And that document scan includes
you might want to step up to the mic, because that way it gets on TV.
The document scan will round out that information, and that does include a lot of the whatever materials were available on boards and committees, task forces, along with the work that's being done by individual departments on these types of key issues.
Having started this with someone in my heart saying this is an unsolvable question or issue, I'm really starting to see that there are some better solutions than what we have right now. Maybe not the solution to end homelessness, but there's certain in mental health and all the other problems that we have in our community. But it is a huge impact, so we're spending a lot of effort on that. Member Lewis.
I just wanted to share that I've taken some look at that already. It looks very good. And yes, that kind of stuff is what we're going to be collecting.
Okay. Member Lewis?
Yeah, just a comment about the survey questions. I would much prefer have people who say they know what they're doing rather than have me, who doesn't know what I'm doing, be involved at all. The idea of having the council, because we are the policymaking committee for the city, having the questions available to read, I think makes a lot of sense. But having the council be involved in critiquing or suggesting questions in the survey, I think is very dangerous, because if one question comes up, then you're probably going to have 9, and they're not all going to be good, solid questions to get what you're looking at. So I'd rather have the professionals do the survey, and as a courtesy, let me see what you're asking, and if I get one of those phone calls, I'll be better prepared.
I was just talking with the mayor that I really do want to see them before they go out. I don't know if it's necessary that I'll add anything. I just want to see the questions, and if there's something in my mind that's missing, suggest to somebody that, hey, this is an aspect. We know that the community fairly well, being counselors and citizens, and I think we'll have a good idea if it isn't being asked. You know, there's probably a reason why it wasn't being asked.
Counselors will receive the survey before it goes out.
Definitive answer. Thank you. Any further discussion? Questions of Mr. Moore? Well, I asked you for concluding remarks a few minutes ago. That was probably about a half an hour ago, so.
Okay, well, I have concluded, thank you.
So at this point, we turn to the portion of the meeting where we have a little policy discussion. I remember this from last year, the year before, that is, I think, one of the things where we try to take where we're headed next. And this is a time where we need to discuss amongst ourselves so that the staff can hear what we have to say and what we're thinking, because it helps them formulate their portion of the budget that they're concerned with. Including in this, I think, wasn't it this meeting last year that we decided that we would have a wish list, a bucket list of some sort? I think we started out with almost that item, and I think that bucket list has worked well. I've seen things go on, and we've all seen things come off, and I would propose that we do the same thing as we did last year and the years before. Further discussion on policy. Member, your name. Benjamin.
What gets worse is when you try to do a full room and actually catch their names in a row to say who's at the, which is why I noticed you wait and let them do it themselves.
Well, taking into account with the PERS outcome and whatnot, our budget, even though revenues are increasing somewhat, and I guess I can only be hopeful that the revenue on the drugs, or marijuana, I'm sorry, comes in healthy, so we can, implement some of these things. Typically, I don't usually put much on a parking lot list or work with the budget, because from my understanding, there really isn't much money to play with there in the first place. So it's more just keeping the sales blowing and getting the ship down the road, or down the way. I guess for policy discussion, I'm looking more at focusing exactly what the city is in charge of or charged with in regards to services. Because we're looking at the police facility, that's something that we need to work with and get done for the services we provide, as well as the fire departments. They need to be tooled up and staffed up, and we got two of them, or one of them down at this point, but those things, as well as we've got the water treatment plant, or the waste treatment, and the water, providing water for the community, roads and sidewalks, and then parks. Although I really love parks, and I want to be a champion for parks. Those other services kind of take precedent, going forward. And when there's enough revenue, depending on how things roll out going forward, next year or the year after, perhaps we can start getting more parks built. Thank you.
Further discussion. Member Bailey.
My interest is, I'm like Member Benjamin, I'm going to be looking at some sort of strategy for funding the fire services that we know we need. I don't want to be in the situation in the spring of having to add in yet another years of extra funding and getting it from someplace. I hope we can be a little more strategic about that. I'm feeling pretty comfortable with what we did last year in terms of police services, and particularly with regard to the opening of the relationship with the Minnow-Brown Bridge and the downtown and so on. We need to sustain that, but I'm feeling like we've maybe have gotten that up to a level of service where it's working. I will be advocating for parks, not necessarily building new ones, because then you have to maintain them. I'm more interested in maintaining and improving the ones we have, and I think we need some thought about that. So those are the areas that I'm going to be looking at coming up in April.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. I'm interested in infrastructure. We added 10% more to the sidewalks last year and brought it up to $1 million, but I think Peter Fernandez was here earlier. I mean, if you look at what we need in terms of infrastructure, it's staggering. And any kind of inroads we can make on nothing new, but fixing and maintaining and bringing up to speed what we have already is crucial to me. And I understand that there's a real problem with funding, but that's where I would like to see if we've got any more revenues than we think, or we've increased. That, to me, is where it ought to go, to fixing our infrastructure.
I'd like to second that. I mean, it was just doing a quick calculation. We have 805 miles of sidewalks. We're able to do roughly 5 miles worth of repair work each year. That's 161 years by the time we get all the way around. And it just seems like we should have more. And I'm the other side of this, and I know it's probably going to have to be a streets and bridges bond, but continuing the maintenance on our streets, because the more we let them go, the quicker and more damage and the more work we're going to have to spend in the long run on those locations. Yep. Further discussion. Member Moore Green.
Thank you, Councilor. Last year, if I'm not mistaken, we were presented with a graph that looked at 16, 17, 18, 19, and maybe up to 20. I don't recall now. But there was a line that was revenue, and then there was a line that was PERS costs. And they intersected in 18, and then kind of PERS went one way and revenue went the other way. And that really concerns me. And I completely understand parks and roads and all of those things, but we do have a fiduciary responsibility to take care of that. And I am curious as to how the city manager and the staff will present that this year and balance it against the further funding of the police, or pardon me, of the fire, and then not having the money for some of those services, because we've got a debt that needs to be paid. So, and I'm not sure that I'm explaining it completely clearly, but it certainly is something that's high on my radar.
So remember, we had the budget. It was submitted then to the council. The council deliberated over it, and in the end decided to take 1.7 million of the ending fund balance at the end of the year of what we have left over. That was how we funded the. And I didn't know if the rest of the budget committee knew that that's how we had solved the problem. That ending fund balance has been growing up. The problem that I saw with this was, and I had asked how much of that ending fund balance is set aside for PERS, so that you know what's an obligation already on the list and not just part of, this is money to spend kind of thing. So I'm hoping we have that information again this year.
Yeah. If I may speak to that, because the Finance Committee's seen some of that information again as it goes on down the line, to where, when will all the Tier 1 and Tier 2 people kind of drop off, and it's...
2040, right.
So I'm sure those numbers will be back in front of us as the budget comes, and I'm getting head shakes.
Well, and maybe perhaps Budget Officer Jacobs could provide a more specific time frame for that information.
I will. Thank you very much. So as we noted earlier, we'll be coming back to this committee in January 18th with the 5-year forecast for the general fund and for a number of other city funds. And with that forecast, we'll provide you with all of that information about PERS. And it will, with the forecast also, we'll be able to embed all of the decisions that were made in the 2017 budget and how they will impact the future balance between revenue and expenditures. So it will be all incorporated in that document. You will see the full picture, our best estimates.
January 18th.
Any further discussion? Member Kyler White.
Thank you, Chair Bednarz. I have a different concern, and that has to do with there's only 2/3 of us here today. And when I was in your chair 2 years ago, sometimes it was very close to not having a quorum. And I'm really concerned about that. There's 18 members. There's only 12 of us here today. So 6 are missing, that's a third. And maybe today is not as important as the meetings in May and in June. But it does concern me, because we do represent various parts of the city. When I go to my neighborhood association meeting, when I talk to my neighbors, I tell them I'm here for you. I do know I represent the whole city, but I also represent especially people in my ward, in my neighborhood. And I encouraged them to tell me and share their concerns so I can bring them to the budget committee. And so I'm concerned that there's apparently large portions of the city who are not represented. And so I just want to throw that out. I don't have a solution. I don't know what to do about it. I can tell you what we do at the neighborhood association, because we have a board there too. And if somebody misses a certain amount of meetings, unexcused, they're gone from the board. And I'm not saying we need a bouncer here to do that. Maybe we do. I am concerned that there's portions of the city who are not represented, and that we may at some point come to a meeting where we don't have a quorum.
I agree, and in fact, I would take that one step further forward. We have, what, 3 incoming city councilors? And I'm hoping they're watching this. They really should be in this room, because this is their bailiwick, and this is going to be part of their bailiwick. You certainly are going to be here, but they need to be part of this discussion as well, or at least in the room when we're having the discussion.
Once you hit November.
This is what it's all about when you get elected. Fun and appointed, I should add. Thank you for that. So I'm not seeing any hands going into the air, so are we done with, I'm guessing we're done with the public policy discussion, and we could move on to public testimony. That's agreeable?
Aye.
Aye, okay. So I have nobody signed up to speak at tonight's budget meeting. However, I know that there's at least one person in this room that's not part of the system, and if you had a desire to come in and speak, now would be the time. You have 3 minutes? Okay. Anybody else?
3 minutes of fame.
Welcome, and thank you for taking your time to come here tonight. So, any other business to come before the committee? Seeing none, I call this meeting adjourned. Well, you really have to.